Hello, and welcome to another AE Tuts tutorial. My name is Juan Novales, and today we're going to be looking at memory and multiprocessing within Adobe After Effects, both CS4 and CS5. And we'll look at CS5's 64-bit and how that affects these settings as well. But first, why in the world would I want to mess with these settings? Well, they could greatly improve your RAM preview and render speeds, and I think that's something we can all benefit from. Let's take a look at first how to get to the screen. To access these preferences, you'd go to, if you're on a Windows machine, Edit, Preferences, and Memory and Multiprocessing. If you're on a Mac, it would be After Effects, Preferences, Memory, and Multiprocessing. The first thing you'll see here under System is a snapshot of your current computer. You'll see that you have I have 8 CPUs or processors, and I also have 16 gigabytes of RAM installed. Right here, I can choose how much of that RAM, total RAM that I have, goes to After Effects and how much goes to other applications. This is useful because I may be running multiple applications at once, such as Photoshop, Premiere, Final Cut, or Vegas, and I might be switching back and forth. Those other programs require memory as well to work, and so here I can give more memory back to the system for those other programs and take a little less for After Effects. However, if I'm just using After Effects, I can give After Effects a lot more memory, but I would leave at least 1 to 2 gigabytes free for the system, even if you're not using any other programs as well concurrently. Next, let's move on to multiprocessing. But first, let's uncheck the setting right here for render multiple frames simultaneously and take a quick look at the differences between 32 and 64-bit programs. You'll notice when I uncheck this that no matter how much RAM I try to give After Effects here, it will not go above 2.4. That's because After Effects is a 32-bit program. It means it cannot access more than a certain amount of RAM. 64-bit programs can access a ton more RAM, and therein lies their advantage. So I can't access more than 2.4 gigabytes right now. Now the way After Effects CS4 gets around this is that it renders it runs multiple copies of itself or background processes at the same time, each of those processes being 32-bit. And with those multiple processes working to render multiple frames at once, you can utilize all of your RAM. That's how After Effects CS4 gets around it. So once I enable this setting, I can access all that RAM. Right here, under the minimum allocation per CPU, I can tell After Effects how much memory of my memory to give to each processor to work as it works in the background. Now, for a better explanation of the relationship between RAM or memory and your processor, I recommend going to the AE Tuts website and going to an article that I wrote a few months ago in which I explain a little more about memory and processors and how they work. It's called Essential Upgrades to Boost Your System. I take a minute to show an analogy of how they work, and I think it would be very useful to understanding these settings right here. So, moving on, the reason why you'd want to change how much memory you have per CPU is because certain comps have very high-res layers that have several thousand pixels by several thousand pixels, and that requires more memory per processor to utilize. If you don't have enough memory per processor for such huge comps, then the processor will fail to work and it will only be using the main process, making it a lot slower. So if you're using an SD or an HD project with not a lot of complex or high-res layers, then it's okay to use less RAM. Otherwise, it's a good idea to up the RAM. Now, the reason why you want to choose less RAM is that you may not have enough RAM to utilize all your processors, because if you're doing 2 gigabytes per processor, you don't have enough processors to utilize 2 gigabytes. It'll use less processors. And so you may want to utilize all your processors, and that's why you can choose less RAM. Let's move on to the next setting, which is pretty much a choice between longer RAM preview or faster rendering. The reason you have to choose is because After Effects CS4 stores your RAM preview in the main process only, the main, not the background processes, which is uses to help render. And so because of that, it's limited on the amount of RAM, because it's 32-bit, that it can use. And so you have to choose between using more of that RAM to store that render, to have a longer render, or towards processing to make it faster. So depending on what you need, sometimes you don't need a very long RAM preview and you just want it to be faster. Other times, you need a longer RAM preview. So that is where the choice comes in right there. Lastly, over here, we have a similar choice up here, which is the number of CPUs to use for After Effects or to leave for the rest of the system. It's just as up here, we left a certain amount of gigabytes for the rest of the system. Down here, we can leave a certain number of the processors that we have for the rest of the system, so that the other programs can utilize them as well. Once again, I would leave at least one, maybe two processors as well by default for the rest of the system so that it operates properly. Down here, I'll just briefly touch on this. This is only relevant if you have a Windows machine. This has to do, this setting right here, which is prevent DLL address space fragmentation, has to do with how After Effects stores your information in the RAM, in memory. It pretty much tries to make After Effects store the information all in the same continuous space. Sometimes I found that it makes my projects a little unstable, so I many times leave that unchecked, but you can play around with that if you like. Now let's take a quick look at CS5 and what is different in CS5. Switching over to After Effects CS5, you'll notice that within the memory and multiprocessing settings, things look slightly different. First off, because it's 64-bit, as I said before, it can utilize a lot more RAM, so it's not an issue as far as the limits in RAM, which means that you pretty much make a decision of how much RAM to leave for the rest of the system and how much Adobe can use for After Effects, and it will actually take that RAM and split it as a pool between the other Adobe programs such as Premiere, Encore, and the Media Encoder, and it'll automatically decide how to utilize and split that RAM up. So basically, you just have to decide how much RAM to leave for the rest of the system and other programs you're running, or how much to give over to After Effects. Right here, very similarly, once again, you get to choose how many processors to give to After Effects and how much to leave for the rest of the system, just like before. The rest of this works the same with the RAM allocation as well, which you can choose up to 3 gigabytes of RAM for the background processes. Well, that's pretty much it. For more information, I recommend going to the Adobe website, to help.adobe.com. And there's articles in both the CS4 and also in the CS5 section on memory and multiprocessing, where you'll find a lot more of what I've covered here today. I hope this has been helpful. This is Juan Novalis for AE Tuts.